It was a half hour before the morning dove call. I had been looking at the bird clock on the studio wall, and that's when I heard that my Nana had passed on. I didn't cry then. It was sad, but somewhat expected, as she was 98 years old and in and out of hospice care that year. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I cried out of grief. I had found myself in a prenatal yoga class, although I wasn't pregnant. So when we were in child's pose and we were getting prompts to visualize our babies inside of us, I had to think of something else. I began to imagine my mom carrying me, and my Nana carrying my mom, and my great-grandmother carrying my Nana. So I had never really thought of my Nana as anything but Nana. I never thought of her as a child or a teenager or an unborn being. But she came into this world and she held space for our family and she left. And it was with all these thoughts that I finally began to cry. My Nana didn't get to know her mother well. She passed when Nana, Mary, was 3. There's a little photograph of Mary as a toddler holding a photo of her mother. Mary became a mother of 6, Nana of many. Her home was a warm, safe space that we'd often visit. It was a small house with one door inside, the bathroom door. She welcomed all of us, including my cat Monet. We'd spend a lot of time in her kitchen, and she'd always give in to all of our different desires and quirks. For instance, she'd let me sit on the laundry machine and write poems as the laundry was going. She'd let me eat raw pasta for some reason. She'd let us sit in our preferred places and watch her do her things like write letters and take her medication. We'd bring our cat Monet, who would sit by the African violet. She'd teach us how to answer her rotary phone. D'Angelo residence, may I ask who's calling? A lot of my favorite memories are of us just doing ordinary things, like hanging the laundry on the line with the church looming in the background. One time I asked my Nana, if there was ever a fire in your house, is there one thing that you would try to save? And she said, absolutely not. I would just make sure everyone's out of the house, safe and sound. And I said, well, what about your wedding photograph? And she paused and she said, actually, I would like to try to save that too if I could, as her husband had passed when they were relatively young. She met her husband during World War II, dancing at the USO. They wrote letters together, and she was a switchboard operator. She would tell me things about the war, about how sometimes the letters would be censored and blacked out, which I thought was a strange thing. And then she also told me about how, as a switchboard operator, she became very familiar with the sounds that the coins would make. She knew the distinction of the sound of a penny dropping versus a quarter, or a dime or a nickel. She was always so good at listening. Sometimes in her house I would hear strange things at night, and she would just say, listen, try to figure out what it is. But sometimes her listening habits got a little strange, especially as she got older and got harder of hearing and a little bit more grumpy. For instance, one time I remember playing a medley of my songs for her on instrumental guitar. And she said, Marion, Can you quit that dissonance? Why can't you play something jazzy like Hickory Dickory Dock? Well, I still have to figure out how to make a rendition of that in honor of her. Her senses began to dwindle as she got older. She started losing her hearing. She started losing her sight and her taste. One time, though, I was sharing a pretzel with her, and she said, "You know, I can't taste this pretzel, but food tastes better with company." And the last time I saw her, we were sharing a meal together outside with sparrows by our feet.